All right, well, tonight we're on page 90 of the Gospel. We're in the chapter called Master and Disciple, and the date. Let me turn back to find out what the date is. My goodness. Boy, a lot happened on this day. I can't find it. There's no date.
March 1882.
Oh, it's a month. Okay, March 1882. All right, so we'll start here. So this is the life of Sri Ramakrishna, which I think everybody's heard of and familiar with. And what were we talking about yesterday? Oh my gosh, we had that beautiful vision of Thakur standing in ecstasy to the songs that were being sung about the Divine Mother. All right, so it's the next day. It says the next day, too, was a holiday for M. He arrived at Dakshineshwar at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Sri Ramakrishna was in his room. Narendra, Bhavanath, and a few other devotees were sitting on a mat spread on the floor. They were all young men of 19 or 20. Seated on the small couch, Sri Ramakrishna was talking with them and smiling. No sooner had M entered the room than the master laughed aloud and said to the boys, "There, he has come again." They all joined in the laughter. M bowed low before him and took a seat. Before this, he had saluted the master with folded hands, like one with an English education. But that day, he learned to fall down on his feet in orthodox Hindu fashion. Presently, the master explained his laughter to the devotees. He said, "A man once fed a peacock with a pill of opium at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The next day, exactly at that time, the peacock came back. It had felt the intoxication of the drug and returned just in time to have another dose." Everyone laughs. M thought that this was a very apt illustration. Even at home, he had been unable to banish the thought of Sri Ramakrishna for a moment. His mind was constantly at Dakshineshwar, and he had counted the minutes until he should go again. Just that little story right there is so indicative of a healthy spiritual life that just the name of God gives us such a feeling of joy inside. That literally, here's Ramakrishna, the incarnation, comparing it to opium, that intoxication of the divine name. So it's really, really something to just enjoy, just be glad. We know we know where to get this lasting food. In the meantime, the master was having great fun with the boys, treating them as if they were his most intimate friends. Peals of side-splitting laughter filled the room as if it were a mart of joy. The whole thing was a revelation to M. He thought, "Didn't I see him only yesterday, intoxicated with God? Wasn't he swimming then in the ocean of divine love, a sight that I had never seen before? And today the same person is behaving like an ordinary man. Wasn't it he who scolded me on the first day of my coming here? Didn't he admonish me, saying, 'And you are a man of knowledge'? Wasn't it he who said to me that God with form is true as God without form? Didn't he tell me that God alone is real, all else is illusory? Wasn't it he who advised me to live in the world unattached, like a maidservant in a rich man's house?" Sri Ramakrishna was having great fun with the young devotees. Now and then he glanced at M. He noticed that M sat in silence. The master said to Ram Lal, "You see, he's a little advanced in years, and therefore somewhat serious. He sits quiet while the youngsters are making merry." M was then about 28 years old. The conversation drifted to Hanuman, whose picture hung on the wall in the master's room. Sri Ramakrishna said, "Just imagine Hanuman's state of mind. He didn't care for money, he didn't care for honor, didn't care for creature comforts or anything else. He longed only for God. When he was running away with the heavenly weapon that he had been secreted in a crystal pillar. Mandodari began to tempt him with various fruits so that he might come down and drop the weapon. But he couldn't be tricked so easily. In reply to her persuasions, he sang this song: "Am I in need of fruit? I have the fruit that makes this life fruitful indeed. Within my heart, the tree of Rama grows, bearing salvation for its fruit. Under the wish-fulfilling tree of Rama, I sit at ease, plucking whatever fruit I will. But if you speak of fruit, no beggar I for common fruit. Behold, I go, leaving the bitter fruit for you." As Sri Ramakrishna was singing the song, he went into samadhi. Again, the half-closed eyes, the motionless body that one sees in his photograph. Just a minute before, the devotees had been making merry in his company. Now, all eyes were riveted on him. Thus, for the second time, M saw the master in samadhi. After a long time, the master came back to ordinary consciousness. His face lighted up with a smile, and his body relaxed. His senses began to function in a normal way. He shed tears of joy as he repeated the holy name of Rama. M wondered whether this very saint was the person who a few minutes earlier had been behaving like a child of 5. The master said to Narendra and M, "I should like to hear you speak and argue in English." They both laughed, but they continued to talk in their mother tongue. It was impossible for M to argue anything before the master. Though Sri Ramakrishna insisted, they did not talk in English. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, all the devotees, except Narendra and M, took their leave of the master. As M was walking in the temple garden, he suddenly came upon the master talking to Narendra on the bank of the goose pond. Sri Ramakrishna said to Narendra, "Look here, come a little more often. You are a newcomer. On first acquaintance, people visit each other quite often, as is the case with a lover and his sweetheart." Narendra and M laughed. "So please come, won't you?" Narendra, a member of the Brahmo Samaj, was very particular about his promises. He said with a smile, "Yes, I'll try." As they were returning to the master's room, Sri Ramakrishna said to M, "When peasants go to market to buy bullocks for their plows, they can easily tell the good from the bad by touching their tails. On being touched there, some meekly lie down on the ground. The peasants recognize that these are without mettle, and so they reject them. They select only those bullocks that frisk about and show spirit when their tails are touched. Narendra is like that bullock of this later class. He is full of spirit within." The master smiled as he said this and continued, "There are some people who have no grit whatever. They are like flattened rice soaked in milk, soft and mushy, no inner strength." It was dusk. The master was meditating on God. He said to M, "Go, talk to Narendra, then tell me what you think of him." Evening worship was over in the temples. M met Narendra on the bank of the Ganges, and they began to converse. Narendra told M about his studying in college, his being a member of the Brahmo Samaj, and so on. It was now late in the evening and time for M's departure, but he felt reluctant to go. Instead, he went in search of Sri Ramakrishna. He had been fascinated by the master's singing and wanted to hear more. At last, he found the master pacing alone in the Nat Mandir in front of the Kali temple. A lamp was burning in the temple on either side of the image of the Divine Mother. The single lamp in the spacious Nat Mandir blended light and darkness into a kind of mystic twilight, in which the figure of the master could be dimly seen. He had been enchanted by the master's sweet music. With some hesitation, he asked him whether there would be any more singing that evening. "No, not tonight," said Sri Ramakrishna after a little reflection. Then, As if remembering something, he added, "But I'm going soon to Balaram Bose's house in Calcutta. Come there. You'll hear me sing." M agreed to go. Master, do you know Balaram Bose? No, sir, I don't. Well, he lives in Bozpara. Well, sir, I shall find him. As Sri Ramakrishna walked up and down the hall with M, he said to him, "Let me ask you something. What do you think of me?" M remained silent. Again, Sri Ramakrishna asked, "What do you think of me? How many annas of knowledge of God do I have?" I don't understand what you mean by annas, but of this I am sure. I have never before seen such knowledge, such ecstatic love, such a faith in God, such renunciation or Catholicity anywhere. The master laughed. M bowed low before him and took his leave. He had gone as far as the main gate of the temple garden when he suddenly remembered something and came back to Sri Ramakrishna, who was still in the Nat Mandir. In the dim light, the master, all alone, was pacing the hall, rejoicing in the self as the lion lives and roams alone in the forest. In silent wonder, M surveyed the great soul. Master to M, "Oh, what makes you come back?" M, Perhaps the house you asked me to go to belongs to a rich man. They might not let me in. I think I'd better not go. I would rather meet you here." Master, "Oh, no. Why should you think like that? Just mention my name. Say that you want to see me, then someone will take you to me." M nodded his assent, and after saluting the master, took his leave. I love the way that M paints these pictures of the master in that dim twilight, dimly seen, this lion pacing as if in the jungle, just a master of his own world, a master of his own space. And that delightful atmosphere, all the giggling and laughing and playing with the young devotees. And M, used to seeing a religious man, that he went and got all this teaching from this very stern renunciate the day before. And he was like, what is this? And it's just a wonderful way. This is one of the things that's so special about Thakur is the number of times in this book that you will hear about laughter and joy and bliss and singing and dancing and samadhi, that his spiritual life was for him the very fount of love, the very fount of his existence. I mean, it was everything that he needed. There was nothing lacking there. And to think that, he opened that window for us to at least glimpse through as we read this, to just catch a little tiny vision of what it was, to spend just a few minutes in that presence. So many times when the devotees talked in the future, like Narendra and M and all those Rakal and everybody after the master passed away, so many times you read when they talk about it to the youngsters that have just come, they all look at them and they say, you can never know the amount of love that we felt in his presence. You can never know. And that, my friends, is what religion should be. So different from what we might have made of it. The potential of it is such a love and such a peace and such a joy that it really is and truly everything that we need. What a goal. What a beautiful, thing to hold in front of our eyes as we go forward in this. Chapter 2, In the Company of the Devotees. It's March 11th now, 1882. About 8 o'clock in the morning, Sri Ramakrishna went as planned to Balaram Bose's house in Calcutta. It was the day of the Dola Yatra. Ram, Manomohan, Rakal, Nitya Gopal, and other devotees were with him. M too came, as bidden by the master. The devotees and the master sang and danced in a state of divine fervor. Several of them were in an ecstatic mood. Nitya Gopal's chest glowed with an upsurge of emotion. Rakal, he laid on the floor in ecstasy, completely unconscious of the world. The master put his hand on Rakal's chest and said, "Peace, be quiet." This was Rakal's first experience of ecstasy. He lived with his father in Calcutta, and now and then he visited the master at Dakshineshwar. About this time, he had studied a short while in Vidyasagar's school in Shyampukur. When the music was over, the devotees sat down for their meal. Balaram stood there humbly like a servant. Nobody would have taken him for the master of the house. M was still a stranger to the devotees, having met only Narendra at Dakshineshwar. A few days later, M visited the master at Dakshineshwar. It was between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The master and he were sitting on the steps of the Shiva temples, looking at the temple of Radhakanta across the courtyard. The master went into an ecstatic mood. Since his nephew Hriday's dismissal from the temple, Sri Ramakrishna had been living without an attendant. On account of his frequent spiritual moods, he could hardly take care of himself. The lack of an attendant caused him great inconvenience. Sri Ramakrishna was talking to Kali, the divine mother of the universe. He said, "Mother, everyone says my watch alone is right. The Christians, the Brahmas, the Hindus, the Muslims, they all say my religion alone is true. But Mother, the fact is that nobody's watch is right. Who can truly understand thee? But if a man prays to thee with a yearning heart, he can reach you through your grace by any path. Mother, show me sometime how the Christians pray to you in their churches. But Mother, what will people say if I go in? Suppose they make a fuss. Suppose they don't allow me to enter the Kali temple again. Well, show me the Christian worship from the door of the church, then." Another day, the master was seated in the small couch in his room with his usual beaming countenance. M arrived with Kali Krishna, who did not know where his friend M was taking him. He had only been told, "If you want to see a grog shop, then come with me. You will see a huge jug of wine there." M related this to Sri Ramakrishna, who laughed about it. The master said, "The bliss of worship and communion with God is the true wine, the wine of ecstatic love. The goal of human life is to love God. Bhakti, it's the one essential thing. To know God through jnana and reasoning is extremely difficult." Then the master sang, "Who is there that can understand what Mother Kali is? Even the 6 darshanas are powerless to reveal her." The master said again, "The one goal of life is to cultivate love for God. The love that the milkmaids, the milkmen, that the cowherd boys had of Vrindavan, what they felt for Krishna. When Krishna went away to Mathura, the cowherds roamed about weeping bitterly because of their separation from him." Saying this, the master sang with his eyes turned upward. "Just now I saw a youthful cowherd with a young calf in his arms. There he stood, by one hand holding the branch of a young tree. 'Where are you, brother Kanai?' he cried. But Kanai scarcely could he utter. Ka was as much as he could say. He cried, 'Where are you, brother?' And his eyes were filled with tears." When M heard this song of the master's laden with love, his eyes became moist with tears. April 2nd, 1882. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting in the drawing room of Keshav Chandra Sen's house in Calcutta. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. When Keshav was told of his arrival, he came to the drawing room dressed to go out, for he was about to call on a sick friend. Now he canceled his plan. The master said to him, "You have so many things to attend to. Besides, you have to edit a newspaper. You have no time to come to Dakshineshwar, and so I've come to see you. When I heard of your illness, I vowed green coconut and sugar to the Divine Mother for your recovery. I said to her, 'Mother, if something happens to Keshav, with whom shall I talk in Calcutta?'" Sri Ramakrishna spoke to Pratap and the other Brahmo devotees. M was seated nearby. Pointing to him, the master said to Keshav, "Will you please ask him why he doesn't come to Dakshineshwar anymore? He repeatedly tells me that he is not attached to his wife and children." M had been paying visits to the master for about a month. His absence for a time from Dakshineshwar called forth this remark. Sri Ramakrishna had asked M to write to him if his coming were delayed. Pandit Samatyayi was present. The Brahmo devotees introduced him to Sri Ramakrishna as a scholar, well versed in the Vedas and the other scriptures. The master said, "Yes, I can see inside him through his eyes, as one sees the objects in a room through a glass door." Trilokya sang. Suddenly the master stood up and went into samadhi, repeating the mother's name. Coming down a little to the plane of the sense consciousness, he danced and he sang, "I drink no ordinary wine, but wine of everlasting bliss. As I repeat my mother Kali's name, it so intoxicates my mind that people take me to be drunk. First, my guru gives molasses for the making of the wine. My longing is the ferment to transform it. Knowledge, the maker of the wine, prepares it for me then. And when it is done, my mind imbibes it in the bottle from the bottle of the mantra, taking the mother's name to make it pure. Drink of this wine, says Ram Prasad, and the 4 fruits of life are yours." The master looked at Keshav tenderly, as if Keshav were his very own. He seemed to fear that Keshav might belong to someone else, that is to say, that he might become a worldly person. Looking at him, the master sang again, "We are afraid to speak, and yet we are afraid to keep still. Our minds, O Radha, half believe that we are about to lose you. We tell you the secret that we know, the secret whereby we ourselves and others with our help have passed through many a time of peril. Now it all depends on you." Quoting the last part of the song, he said to Keshav, that is to say, renounce everything, call on God. He alone is real. All else is illusory. Without the realization of God, everything is futile. This is the great secret. The master sat down again and began to converse with the devotees. For a while, he listened to a piano recital, enjoying it like a child. Then he was taken to the inner apartments, where he was served with refreshments, and the ladies saluted him. As the master was leaving Keshav's house, the Brahmo devotees accompanied him respectfully to his carriage. With what an intensity he must be able to say things like that. Can you imagine Thakur himself talking to you face to face and saying, the one secret, God alone is real. Everything else is an illusion. And you're looking in his eyes and you just see that conviction, the strength of that knowledge, a man who sees what he speaks, who understands. Can you imagine the feeling that would ripple through your body, the course of that knowledge rippling through your mind from a God knower, a seer, something we only, hold in our imaginations for most of our lives. Here, here is that. Someone who spoke from experience, someone who saw Kali, the mother of the universe. You know, I could joke with her. I could have fun with her. Like his little statement about the church, you know. Ooh, well, what will they say, mother, if you take me in there? Better you leave me at the door. I'll just kind of look in and see how the Christians worship that way.
Swami, I like the thing he said about everybody thinks their watch has the right time.
Yeah.
I mean, that what a timeless idea, you know?
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. It's one of the things that really holds us back. You know, I just like to picture in my mind what a world would be like where religions all respected and loved each other and cherished the different dimensions of knowledge about the divine that each one of them carries and holds. You know, if we
Well,
had that same kind of zeal for sharing that and learning that, and the same curiosity about how do the Christians worship, how do the Muslims worship, how do the Catholics worship, you know?
actually, I was referring to how clever, like if you go back to the days of wristwatches, like now we
Uh-huh.
all have our phones and we all have the same time, about how, you know, the idea that everybody thinks their watch is the right time.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
such an analogy. Everyone thinks their religion is the right path.
Yeah, and not
And that
just
was
our religion. We
clever. It
basically
just,
think everything we think is right, you know, whether that's the nature of ego, you know, this delusion of ourself that we live in. We are the center of our own universe, and we demand that people know it. Yeah.
Yes.
No, it's that humility. It's what has to be broken to see the oneness, is that notion of I, the great, the center, the knower, the strong. You know.
Swami, I have a kind of a comment or want a clarification. You know, where he says, Thakur says that the path of jnana is difficult. And he's always said that, you know, in his, and it always kind of stays with me at the back of my head. Because, you know, I mean, we practice all paths together. Like, you know, when Swami Vivekananda said, you know, do all four. In reality, we do all four. But he so clearly says that bhakti is better. And I've heard several explanations that maybe it was the audience at that time, maybe it was those times, because Swami Vivekananda came here and then stressed jnana more in the US. And you know, people say how he didn't take after his master, you know, by so what's your take on that?
Oh boy. Okay. Well, first of all, I would, you know, he's saying that he's not saying best in the sense of better quality. He's saying best in the fastest and most efficacious path to know God. Because we're sitting here, you know, you touch this desk, your senses all work together and tell you it's real. And you're going to have to counter that somehow in a way that you actually believe, not just an intellectual, oh no, everything's unreal, God alone is real. Through knowledge means you have to come to believe, and not just believe, you have to believe it's so real that you could reach out in order to put your hand through the desk. You know, that's the level of faith we're talking about. We see it in Vivekananda when he had that experience of jnana in that sense, and he's walking through Calcutta, and he literally had to bang his head against a fence to make sure that it was real, that it was actually substantial. So that's very difficult to do because our senses and our mind are always conspiring to keep us at the center of our universe and to convince us of their reality. I'm real. You know, look at me, I'm real. I know this and I know this and I know this and I can do this and I'm doing my practice and I'm becoming a better person, and we fundamentally at a very deep level believe ourselves to be real. And so while he's not saying it's impossible, He's just saying, look realistically at your life. You go out and do things all day long as if the world was real, as if everybody you met was real, as if you were real. And you spend, of the 24 hours a day, you probably spend 18 of them reinforcing the idea that the world is real. So if you're going to take a practice to counter that, in this day and age, he says, this day and age, the stomach is king. You know, our the needs of material life are what we're, you know, having to work so hard for and so much for. He says, in this day and age, society does not have the support in it to give you that space in the forest, you know, to go and to get away from that 18 hours a day of reinforcing the reality of the material in order for you to counter it in your own knowledge to the extent that you can actually push it back and conquer it. That's a very tall order, very difficult order. And so when he says it's best, he means it's the fastest way, that love is the thing most natural to us. We can use our delusion in bhakti. We can use our idea of separateness and fall in love with a God that's separate. And God will play along, and it's real. You know, this is the very important thing to know. It's like a lot of times we think that, like, oh, bhakti is kind of a fake way because we have to pretend that God is real and we have to love God and we have to imagine God and we have to talk to God and we have to do all these things. And the tendency, especially in the modern world, is to poo-poo that kind of stuff. Like, oh, that's very cute. Oh, that's very naive of you in that way. But in Thakur's eyes, he understood the strength of that, you know, to be able to take your weaknesses and to make them a part of your pursuit of God is a very powerful way to sublimate that ignorance. And that love will grow, because when you see, when you believe yourself to be real, it's not God that becomes unreal. You know, God stays as real as ever, but you've created this phantom of self. And so God exists. You know, as long as you separate yourself from God, out of those two things, it's you that doesn't exist. God still very much exists. And so that's why a bhakti, even though Jnana says that the truth is one without a second, the Advaita says there is nothing else, there is only God. You know, you can't experience that, you know, in normal life. And so he's saying that through this experience of God as separate, God is the real one, and the love that God expresses and the love that God does, in fact, benevolently offer to you and inspire in you is real. But the reality, the fun thing of it, to me, the beautiful thing about bhakti, is that in the end, your concept of you is going to disappear, and your concept of God is going to disappear, because both of them are false, both of them are inadequate. And what's going to take its place? The love that you have experienced and nurtured and been blessed with through this relating to this God that's separate from you. That love, the trick of it, the fun of it, is that love is the real thing. That's God, that's the divine. And that love will consume both you and the divine into the singularity, into that one without a second. You know, that love is the real part of your concept of God. And you will fall into it and lose yourself in it willingly. You see, in Jnana Yoga, you're being asked to drop off of a cliff in the dark, to let go and to fall without any idea of anything catching you. In Bhakti, you're asked to do the very same thing, but you're told that your divine mother is waiting at the bottom to catch you. There's nothing to fear. And so how much easier is it to let go of that branch, knowing that your mother or your father, your beloved, is right there to catch you when you fall. So you can do that act of faith much easier in the bond of love with your mother catching you than you can just alone in the dark, letting go, not knowing where the bottom is, and actually knowing that there is no bottom, that letting go is your death, is your annihilation as a self, as a small self, as an independent self. And so it's not so much that we practice all the paths. We take one as our primary and we use the others to support it. And so that's what Ramakrishna is teaching us. He's saying, hold on to me. You can read about me. You can know me. I'm still here. I will touch you. I will manifest myself in your mind. I'll be there in your prayers. I'll answer your prayers. I'll show myself in your dreams, perhaps. Walk with me and I'll bring you there. And that is the power of Ramakrishna, is that he'll meet you wherever you are. The avatar is your power to love and your power to be loved. Your power to recognize those things is the avatar. And so as you indulge in that relationship and learn to surrender, it's very hard to surrender to something you don't know. It's hard to surrender something into nothingness or into fullness, whatever you want to call it. That's very difficult to do, but it's not so difficult to fall in love with someone who's as pure a form of love as Sri Ramakrishna or as Buddha or as Jesus or any time that Thakur has manifested himself in the world, So it's like that. It's like that. All of them are available to you. Not one is better than the other. It's that one is easier and more effective, giving the nature of the age than the others.
So, do you think Ramakrishna Thakur could speak and be any avatar, any Ishtar to any person?
Yeah.
And if Vivekananda truly was his extension or was part of the triad or the whatever you want to say, in the United States, in the West at the time, science was important. There was the science of the mind. There was all this focus on analysis. And maybe Vivekananda was just speaking to the tone of the time and the place when he emphasized.
I think that's absolutely true. Although I would not posit so much that we find science so important or that we find this so important in that sense. I really think it's more of the mess we've made of God. We've made God such a defined little creature, that feels this way and feels that way, and all of these things. And who's very judgmental, very jealous, very angry, very accusatory, very demanding. We've done such bizarre things with God that I think Vivekananda got here and said, he came and he said, if I say God, I'm going to have to deal with books and books and books and books worth of assumptions that everybody in this room is going to make, that's false, because they have no idea of God as the whole. They have no idea of God as one without a second. They have no idea of the ego being the veil. They've interpreted the religion in the West so materially, and defined it so materially that we've created these divine realms that are basically just modifications of materialism, a big, beautiful heaven with big, beautiful this, that, and the others, and, wives and husbands and virgins and pleasures and joys and, bodies and, literally even to this day, the Catholic Church, the Episcopal Church, they still believe that when you get enraptured, when you get called to God in the end, you're going to take your body back and you're physically going to God as an individual, and you're going to be that individual forever. So Vivekananda understood, if I go that route, I'm going to have to start from ground zero and give these guys a full-on lesson from the ground up, and I'm going to anger every single one of them before it's over. So I think he basically said, what, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hit it right square in the head. We're just going to start talking about the real nature of the universe. Give them the idea that God is one without a second, that God is with form and without form, that God has been working for eons outside of all religions, as God alone is, and so to just not do it through a path where we would be able to bring in all of our assumptions and all of our wrong thinking and just get more lost. He just kind of comes in and says, no, let's just start fresh and let's learn about this divine. And then once we get these fundamental notions of God down, then we can approach her as lovers of God. Then we can approach through relationship, because it won't be so tied into these cultural assumptions of a jealous God, an angry God, a powerful God, a God that's, whose best way to worship is to praise his power, to praise his majesty. It's like, but bring God to the heart from the inside out, and emphasize that love, emphasize that union, that unity, that oneness. That would be my stab in the dark.
Well, and also, I mean, his take on women and respecting women and how they're the anchor in the heart of society, kind of, I'm totally bashing up what he says, but just that's so loving. And then to say, no, you don't ever help anybody. You worship them. You're lucky to worship them.
Yes.
And the heart in that, the pure love and unconditional love is overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely right. You see, and the fact that you see that is exactly why he said that. Because he knew that you would see that, and he knew you would be inspired by that, and he knew that in that you could fall in love. So you're absolutely right in that he came to a different place at a different time, to teach us, and he understood where we were at implicitly, and he knew we'd be that way for a long time, because you can't change the depth of culture so easily, But instead of trying to undo it by countering what we think, he just let us think what we think, and he just started planting a new seed, planting a new idea, a new reality that he knew would mature in time in us. So
Yeah. Thank you, Swami.
yeah.
Thank you.
April 2nd, 1882. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting in the drawing room of Keshav Chandra Sen's house in Calcutta. Oh, I already read that. Now I don't know where we stopped. Now it all depends on you. Quoting this last part of the song, he said to Keshav, that is to say, renounce everything and call on God. He alone is real, all else illusory. Without the realization of God, everything is futile. This is the great secret. The master sat down again and began to converse with the devotees. For a while, he listened to a piano recital, enjoying it like a child. Then he was taken into the inner apartments, where he was served with refreshments, and the ladies saluted him. As the master was leaving Keshav's house, the Brahmo devotees accompanied him respectfully to his carriage. Sunday, April 9th, 1882. This is where the change in date was. Sri Ramakrishna was seated with his devotees in the drawing room of Ramkrishna Mukherjee's house in Calcutta. It was between 1 or 2 in the afternoon. Since Colonel Vishwanath lived in that neighborhood, the master intended to visit him before going to see Keshav at the Lily Cottage. A number of neighbors and other friends of Ramkrishna had been invited to meet Sri Ramakrishna. They were all eager to hear his words. The master, God and his glory. This universe is his glory. People see his glory and they forget everything. They don't seek God, whose glory is this world. All seek to enjoy woman and gold, lust and greed. But there is too much misery and worry in that. This world is like a whirlpool of Vishalakshi. Once a boat gets into it, there is no hope of its rescue. Again, the world is like a thorny bush. You have hardly freed yourself from one set of thorns before you find yourself entangled in another. Once you enter a labyrinth, you find it very difficult to get out. Living in the world, A man becomes seared, as it were. A devotee. Then what is the way, sir? Master. Prayer and the company of holy men. You cannot get rid of an ailment without the help of a physician, but it is not enough to be in the company of religious people only for a day. You should constantly seek it, for the disease has become chronic. Again, you can't understand the pulse rightly unless you live with a physician. Moving with him constantly, you learn to distinguish between the pulse of phlegm and the pulse of bile. Devotee. What is the good of holy company? Master. It begets yearning for God. It begets love of God. Nothing whatsoever is achieved in spiritual life without yearning. By constantly living in the company of holy men, the soul becomes restless for God. This yearning is like the state of mind of a man who has someone ill in the family. His mind is in a state of perpetual restlessness, thinking how the sick person can be cured. Or again, one should feel a yearning for God, like the yearning of a man who has lost his job and is wandering from one office to another in search of work. If he is rejected at a certain place which has no vacancy, he goes there again the next day and inquires, is there any vacancy today? There is another way. Earnestly praying for God. God is our very own. We should say to him, O God, what is your nature? Reveal yourself to me. You must show yourself to me. For what else have you created? For what else have you created me? Some Sikh devotees said to me, God is full of compassion. I said, why should we call him compassionate? He is our creator. What is there to be wondered at if he is kind to us? Parents bring up their children. Do you call that an act of kindness? They must act that way. Therefore, we should force our demands on God. He is our father and our mother, isn't he? If the son demands his patrimony and gives up food and drink in order to enforce his demand, then the parents hand his share over to him 3 years before the legal time. Or when the child demands some pice from his mother and says over and over again, Ma, give me a cup of pice. I beg you on my knees. Then the mother, seeing that earnestness and unable to bear it anymore, tosses the money to him. There is another benefit from holy company. It helps one cultivate discrimination between this real and the unreal. God alone is real. That is to say, the eternal substance, and the world is unreal. That is to say, transitory. As soon as a man finds his mind wandering away to the unreal, he should apply discrimination. The moment an elephant stretches out its trunk to eat a plantain tree in the neighbor's garden, it gets a blow from the iron goad of the driver. You know, this is a fundamental teaching here, and it's a really, really, really important one. We are taught by Thakur to be in constant discernment of the mind. We're taught to be the witness at all times and to not have the mind make a single motion in thought without our awareness. And as soon as it lifts off of the plane of that quietness, of that stillness, of that Om or the name that's within you, as soon as it leaves that ground floor to build up any kind of imagination or imaginary place or thought or discussion about politics or place or country or beauty or whatever it is, the second we lift off of that awareness of ourself as awareness, as soon as we lift above that idea of ourself as witness, as the seer, and start believing any of the noise of any thought that occurs in our local mind, in this small mind, like that elephant that reaches over the fence and gets a blow on the nose, you immediately employ the mind to say, what is this? Where are you going? Get back here. And you come back to that silence, that receptivity, that openness to the moment, where you're just taking everything in with the knowledge and awareness of the divine nature in it. And you stay there, and you stay there, and you stay there, and you stay there. And the goal is to never leave there for any reason. And he's telling us here, and the very next question by one of the neighbors is going to enforce this. The neighbor, why does a man have sinful tendencies? You know, why does this happen? Master, oh, in God's creation, there are all sorts of things. He has created bad men as well as good men. It is he who gives us good tendencies, and it is he again who gives us evil tendencies. Neighbor, well, in that case, we aren't responsible for our sinful actions, are we? The Master, sin begets its own result. That is God's law. Won't you burn your tongue if you chew a chili? In his youth, Matur led a rather fast life, so he suffered from various diseases before his death. You see this notion, it's like, he doesn't say, oh, you're right, you're not responsible. Although that is the truth, right? If it is God and God alone, and God is the doer and we are the instrument, and this is how we are, is that not God's fault? Yes, it is God's fault, you know? So what's he saying here? He's saying, you don't know that it's God's fault. It's easy to say that, but you still see yourself as the doer. So sin begets its own reward. Because you believe that you're the doer, you're going to suffer the karma for what you think you're doing, and you're going to suffer because of it, regardless of the truth of the matter that God is the doer and you are the instrument. As soon as you know God is the doer, as soon as you truly understand that you are an instrument, at that point the karma disappears. At that point the suffering disappears. But it's you who has to come to this knowledge. It's you that has to know that it is God alone that is the doer, not in the form of words and concept, but in the way of seeing and understanding in your being, that you know that you are not.
Tommy, do you think
Yes.
that you could, like, someone who knows that, think they could do like quote unquote bad things? Like, okay, God, if you want me to steal this, I'll steal it. You know, like, do you understand the question?
I do. And the fact is, the matter is, Thakur says that if a realized soul commits a murder, he's not guilty of murder. So what he's saying is that, yes, if you actually know yourself to be nothing but an instrument, you would never use the word I, and you would never see God asking you to do something. So you would not approach it that way because it's all in the moment, spontaneous. You would simply pick up the knife and commit the murder. You know, there would be no calculation within you about it. It would be a spontaneous act, and there would be no I responsible for it.
There he is.
All right, the man with the broken Mac is back.
It's your Mac or your internet?
Is everything working? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
See me? My computer did the same thing. I'm gonna have to figure out what's going on. It just suddenly gave little pink boxes everywhere, froze, and then went dark, rebooted itself.
Do you have enough
So-
headroom in, Swami, do you have enough
Yeah,
headroom?
so
in
that
your-
we were talking
there?
about the nature of of realization and being the instrument of the divine. You see, when you're the instrument of the divine, the God, the hammer doesn't have any sense of itself as a hammer. It doesn't think about itself at all. It's picked up and the hammer is driven and the nail is driven in with it. And it doesn't think to itself, oh, I did such a great job with that one. I'm sure I'll be used again for that. You know, so it's like that. When we're an instrument, when we truly understand the relationship that God alone is real, which means I'm not here. This sense of I is just just literally a mixture of thinking. There's no more to you than just a conglomeration of thoughts bundled into a little mess of a yarn ball, you know, that gives you a sense of difference, a sense of I. We take we take all of the feeling of you know, of God. We take all the abilities of God, all the animations of God, and we own them, you know. But even psychology teaches us that our decisions are made before we're aware of them, right? You read that in Psychology Today has a great article about that. that they've put those sensor caps on people and asked them to make decisions, and they see the brain fire the decision about 3 seconds before the person becomes aware of the decision. And yet we take full responsibility for that. So that's what's happening, is that God is acting through us, and we're identifying with it and claiming it, stealing. We steal the actions of God and take responsibility for them. And so he's saying, as long as you do that, you're going to feel the responsibility of your actions, and you won't be able to see it with the knowledge of the whole from the perspective where the divine is in as he uses you to do these things. You'll see them from your ego perspective. And from that ego perspective, since you don't have the whole to deal with, since you don't know all of the variables, you're going to think that some things you're doing are right and some things that you're doing are wrong. And you're going to think sometimes you're in trouble and sometimes you're not, and sometimes you're happy and sometimes you're sad. You're not going to be able to understand the movement of the divine within its wholeness and see how the perfection of the moment. You're going to think that things are imperfect or incorrect, and you will suffer as you act that out and play that part out. But when you know yourself to be the dreamer, not the character in the dream, but the character dreaming the dream, when you know yourself to be that, you know that all is perfect, that all is as it should be, and there is no right, there is no wrong, there is no other. And you live in that space. And you can still, of course, this part I don't understand. He does say, that even at that level of knowledge, you can still choose to act as an individual in this world for the good of humanity. That there is a way of having the veil so thin that you just have a sense of I, a little bit of a sense of agency, and yet you see yourself in the constant company of the beloved, and the beloved is working and telling you what to do and all of these things. So there are many levels of this kind of thinking. It's not an on and off type thing. And Mother is moving us toward that, moving us little by little to that understanding. But be where you are. That's really what he's saying here. Be where you are and go forward. And don't spend too much time trying to figure out where you are. It doesn't really matter. Just keep going forward. Keep practicing love. Keep sharpening your wisdom. Keep doing your practice, dismantling your ego. Build your awareness. And little by little, as you do these things, you'll begin to see the reality of them. Because as you clear the mind of the noise, you begin to see the subtle mistakes that you've made that have been the foundation of your ignorance. You'll get back to that level of hearing, that level of understanding, to where the subtle things become apparent to you. And that's when they begin to fall off. When you have that awareness, looking at awareness, the knots of your wrong thinking untie themselves. You'll have those aha moments. So, all right, it's 8:06 already. Are there any questions or concerns aside from my bad computer?
Swami,
I
I've
guess it's
always
only
been
my
mystified by Abraham in the Old Testament who sacrifices.
Next Tuesday.
I guess I'm not being.
I don't think he can hear.
No.
What was that, Sylvia?
Oh, Regina was talking and you
Are
couldn't
you
hear
muted?
her.
I can't hear you.
Can't hear anybody. Hello.
Okay, I got you. Now you're back.
Go ahead, Regina.
Okay, Swami, I always wondered about the Old Testament story about Abraham sacrificing Isaac.
Yes.
And I was wondering if maybe like he was doing a bad thing, but he was following God's. It was driven by God. It's a hard story.
It's a very hard story. It is a very hard story. And there's two versions of it. I did a little class on that, and somebody actually came to me and with writing an article by a Jewish rabbi who says that in the original story, he actually does kill his son Isaac. That he's the only one that comes down off the mountain. And he says that the story was changed not too long after it was put down, softened, because the people, the rabbis were like, nobody's going to understand this. Again, there is no justifying it in our worldview. From as long as we have an ego self and we think of ourselves from the perspective that we see ourselves from day to day, there's not going to be a way to explain that story that makes us go, oh, okay. because within that realm, it's not going to ever be okay. But in the divine realm, where from the perspective of one without a second and beyond, that story has been used to kind of it's a story that's equated to God's willingness to sacrifice his son for you. It's equated with that ideal that God loves you so much that he would be willing to do even that for you. And he's mirroring it from the other direction, saying, see, it's also possible for you to love me so much that you'll do anything for me. And so it's from that perspective of that love, that intensity of love being shared back and forth, where God took that opportunity of taking Abraham's act of sacrifice, act of worship, giving up the thing he loved most for his beloved, and then he turns around and does the same. It reverses that and worships you by sacrificing to you his son to demonstrate his love for you. Because up until that, it was always the other way around. Us sacrificing for God, us worshiping God, us loving God, it was always presented that way. And through the story of the Christ, God is saying, no, that's not the complete story. There is an endless amount of love from this side for you, and that I worship you as I bring you to your realization. I worship you as I give you my grace, as I give you my forgiveness, as I give you my love, my unconditioned guarantee that I will always be with you. And so that's how I've made sense of it so far. That's how I've seen it, the little bit that I understand and read about those things. But as an act, it's a scary thing. And from our ego perspective, it won't resolve. It is a scary thing. But it belongs to a very high realm, and it's something we can just kind of leave there and look at it with a little sense of awe, like, wow, that was an amazing display of love by a devotee for the divine. And that's an ideal. That's, we don't all want to go kill our sons, but we all want to love God more than anything else in our life. And I think that's the message, is that that's really what it takes. That's the level of love that allows for, let's say, realization, that level of unity, that level of trust, that level of surrender is where we're going. That is the ideal. And, we go forward.
It's a harsh test, but I guess tests are not unknown in Vedanta.
Well, you can frame it as you want. You could say it's a test. It's hard to know because we don't know the level of Abraham's purity. We don't know his level of faith with the divine. It may not have been a huge thing for him. If you know the world to be unreal, if you know that you're living in a dream, let's bring it down to that level. Oh. You're in a dream, and you've got this dream son, and you know that son is in the dream. If you know that, what is the sacrifice? Nobody's being killed, nobody's dying, nobody's being hurt. There is one without a second. So at that level, there's a very different experience, not even experience. There's a very different being going on. There's a very different isness being understood. And I think from our space, of really not knowing that we're in a dream, having no real idea that this world is unreal, there's not any way that we can safely talk about that act as being a good thing outside of just an ideal, outside of, just an amazing exhibition of love and an amazing exhibition of obedience and surrender. So I think that's how we take it. And when we're sitting on Mother's knee, enjoying our cup of amrita, we can say, by the way, there's this one story. Whew, I don't know. I don't know. That was a little bit, that was a little bit tough for me. What do you have to say about it? Then you can have your answer. I think that's the best we can do.
Thank you, Swami.
Yeah.
A lot of food for thought.
Yeah, it is. And it is an amazing story, and it's amazing that it's there. It's amazing that we've been trusted with that story, because you could certainly take that story and create a lot of trouble for God.
Rabbis say it was a test and he failed. He should have argued with God and said no.
Yeah, he could have. And the story, as the story finally made it, the God gives him a ram and says, take the ram and kill him instead, let your son go. But this article that I read, which I didn't keep, but I could probably find it. This rabbi said, no, in the traditional story, the original story, Abraham comes down from the mountain alone. So, yeah. Anyway.
Along those lines, Swami, is that there's at least two hymns I know of that talk about, when they're talking about the Thakur and Ma, they talk about how they can convert our sinful acts to holy ones, or whatever the right frame. But really that's because through merging with them through love, then the ego disconnects, and all the sinfulness, the separationness of action becomes just the will of the divine, the will of the one. And so there can be no good or bad about it.
Yes, that from one perspective, that's true. There is another perspective, in the sense that when you go running after that glass of wine, God understands that you're not running after a glass of wine. God understands that you're running after divine bliss, and you think it's in the glass of wine. So God knows that all of your desire has truly, in its essence, only been one desire, and that was to be with the divine. So she sees that when she looks at you. She knows all the things that you think of as vice, because you think you're looking for things separate from God and running after things that are not God. That is the sin of it, because you're basically running toward forgetfulness by your own definition, but it's nonetheless your definition, and you're seeing it as separate from God and running after it. But the divine, knowing everything, understands that you are running to her alone. So there is no sin from that perspective, from that understanding, because God knows the truth of you. He knows you as the realized self. He knows you as himself. And so in that sense, all of our sin resolves. It doesn't actually change. It resolves because we understand something more. We've learned something higher, and we've come to understand the nature of it. Hafiz, in his poem where he says, all the desires of your body are holy, all the desires, and he says it 3 times, all the desires of your body are holy. When I first read that, I freaked out. I was like, oh my God, that's the most dangerous thing I've ever heard anybody say. That, how much trouble could I get into thinking that way, And I had to think for a long time to try and make sense of that poem, because I was like, my God, that's an outrageous statement. And that was, I got that understanding from the gospel actually one day when I was wondering about it. This notion that all the desires of our body are for God alone. We are seeking for unity. We are seeking for oneness. We are seeking bliss. We are seeking connection. We're seeking, fulfillment. We're seeking contentment. Those are all divine names. So our desires, when understood, and that's why Mother tells us to discern constantly, because it's through that discernment we begin to understand what we really want. We begin to understand, God, I don't want these things. They don't last. I'm constantly trapped in chasing after them. I wish I had a drunkenness that never ended. Ah, you want divine bliss. Come, my child, I have it. And when we start to understand that, we begin to turn to God. We begin to enjoy our practice. Oh my God. We start to enjoy our meditations. We start to long for our prayers. We start to giggle through our devotional singing. We begin to dance in the shower at the thought of God. This is where we started today, in the company of Thakur. There's dancing and music and laughter and joy and intensity of love and play, all in absolute purity because of the understanding of our nature as divine. And that is home. That's where we're going, and once we know that, then everything is fine, because everything reminds us of our beloved. Everything reminds us of our divinity. We will be just like Thakur. Every time we turn around, we're like, oh Lord, he's in samadhi again. You'll pick up a pencil and it will remind you of Krishna's flute, and boom, off you go. You'll see a woman on the bus cross her leg like Krishna. You're like, oh my God, it's the Divine Mother Sita. Look at that. It's unbelievable. And you're in samadhi again. You miss your bus stop. That's where we're going. And that's where we'll get to. And what a divine, beautiful that is. What a divine, beautiful. So that's the thing. Be where you are. Go forward. Don't forget for a moment that you are in the presence of the beloved. Don't lose your sobriety of awareness for a moment. The things that we lose sobriety thinking causes of course, that's a thing that's going to be mistreated too. I can just see an atheist who's listening in, who hears me say, thinking will cause you to be intoxicated and forget God. Stop thinking, because there's no notion of the divinity within. And when somebody says stop thinking, they're saying be stupid, be gullible, follow anything. But that's not the message. By stop thinking, it is stop the ego noise and think with the universal mind. Let the universal mind think and you respond. You don't have to think. The universal mind is always expressing. And when you shut up the ego, you hear that. And you begin to manifest that. You act on universal mind and not on private thought. So that's the difference. So when I say stop thinking, it's stop using your mind to think about the Cardassians and start listening to the silence where the bliss and the joy of existence is and will become apparent to you. All right. Okay. Jai Ma, Jai Thakur, Jai Swamiji.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you, Swami. Good night.
Yes, good night. Be well.
Good night.